Okay.
Hello, Samantha. Thank you for doing this interview with me. Can you please tell me your name and
Yeah.
where you're from?
Yep. So my name is Samantha Hardy, and I am originally from Canada. I'm from the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, BC. And yeah, that's it.
Tell me what BC's like.
Yeah. BC is just the most beautiful country. I've been all over the world, and British Columbia is, I can say, nothing compares to it. It has beautiful mountains, the ocean. Um, it's just so green and lush and clean and mild. The weather on the coast is very mild. Rains a lot in the winter, but not, it does snow occasionally on the lot mountains, but not sailing one day and then skiing the same day type of thing, which I've done. So it's just absolute and really, really clean and just gorgeous. Yeah.
Nice. It sounds like my country. Um, so tell me about when did you first get to the United States? Have you always been traveling back and forth?
Yes. So my family travels a lot. Before I was married, we used to come down to the States a lot, mostly just through driving over the border, kind of doing the West Coast thing. We went to Washington a lot. So a lot of times in Seattle, just shopping and stuff like that. California, lots of times to California, um, Mexico and stuff like that, but always kind of the West Coast side. Yeah. So.
And how do you find it is as a Canadian being accepted here in the United States?
Yeah, it's always been really like basically the same. People, I think, a lot of times assume I'm American until they start talking to me, and then they're like, "Oh, wait, you kind of have like that northern sort of accent," and they're like, "Oh, okay, you're not American." So yeah, very accepting, kind. The border was good up until I got married, and then the border was really hard. I've had some pretty wild stories going back and forth over the border and troubles with that. People don't assume that, being from Canada, they think, oh, it's nothing like Mexico or something like that, but it is. It's, we just don't have the people like we do down in Mexico. So.
I'm glad because most people have the misconception that Canada and the United States are kissing cousins, so to
Right.
speak, and that that everybody's the same. What would be the
Right.
differences between Canadians and Americans for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. um, yeah, what's the difference? There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of differences. Socially, I would say, Canadians are very like their space, um, like really, really love, well, I guess just from the West Coast, we love to be outdoors. We love kind of that more natural living. Americans are very way more consumer driven. Um, and so yeah, I that's probably one thing I really noticed was the cars. Everyone worried about their cars all the time. And I was like, a car for me was always just A to B. Like it didn't matter what it was. Even if you had money, didn't have money, it just wasn't important. So definitely the consumerism was the biggest things that I noticed that when I first started coming down, and then still to this day, I'm like, wow, it's just over the top how much stuff Americans have. Um, so, and then, yeah, just, and then the loudness, Americans are very loud, way more than Canadians. I have a loud husband.
Except for
So
hockey, ice hockey.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Americans have a very, I mean, sorry, Canadians, when it comes to kind of the hockey stuff, we have more, there's so much Scottish influence and so much that English, like kind of like hard language, um, and like rough. It's an outdoorsy rough. If you kind of think of like the outdoors Scottish people or
Yeah.
sort of like that, they're very like they can sound very rough, and the language is not good either, especially around hockey. But it's slang, right? Like it's not meant to be
Yeah.
horrible. Sometimes it does sound.
But the world perceives Canada to be very acceptant on all sorts of people.
Yeah,
It's the place where people have gone to find asylum and different things like that. What
yeah,
would you talked about crossing the border, you
yeah,
know, what was tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have lots to say about that. Yeah. So when I was married in the States, and this was kind of before kind of the borders were too kind of crazy about back and forth. So we always crossed borders. The border crossing was not as big as a deal, but suddenly it was just that time that it just really changed where um, what happened was I had my first daughter, Melissa, and I took her. No, it wasn't the first time. So she was like a year old, maybe 2 years old. No, she wasn't two. She was about a year and a half. I went up to see we all went up to see, my husband included, went up to see my family up in Canada in the summer. And we were come home to our house. I had Melissa with me. She was about 15 months, about that. And coming through the Vancouver border, and the border guy said, your paperwork isn't complete. Like, I was married, had a child, had a house, was working, everything, but my paperwork wasn't fully complete. So he said, your husband and your daughter can go home, but you have to stay in Canada. And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you can't come. And so we ended up all going back. My husband had to go to work, so he ended up flying out like 2 weeks later, but we had to get a lawyer and get all this stuff. Luckily, we had a bit of money my dad helped us out to pay for um, kind of the process of the immigration to speed it up a bit through the lawyer, so we could cross and go back to our life. I had to call work. I had to, delay everything. I stayed up in Canada for another 2 months without
Wow.
being out. Yeah, so I could get my paperwork done. So, and I mean, I've gone other times where I had my kids, my other two little ones had not, they had passports, but it was land crossing. So, but they didn't tell us that you had to drive across, not fly across. So we got to Seattle and we were getting our connecting flights up there, and they said, oh no, your little ones, because we knew our little ones wouldn't go, we would only go to Mexico or Canada, not over to Europe or anything like that. So we got these land passports because they were little, and they're like, oh, no, no, you can't fly to Canada. You have to um, drive. So we had to rent a car and go through that way. I mean, just craziness. So they've
And you're all
gotten,
part of North America, right? So
oh, yeah, yeah. And they don't care if you have a baby. They don't, they're like, sorry, your baby can go and you can stay. And like, they don't care.
yeah.
So, that hasn't, it's just very stressful. Like, it's not been easy going over the border with, we have 4 kids and back and forth. It's been harder.
It's nice to hear this, and I'm glad It's complementary to some of the other countries because the misconception is that Canadians have it easy. They are
Right.
Americans. The UK might have it easier because they have this passport thing, which for some reason, although we're part of the Commonwealth, you don't have.
Right.
So it's amazing the number of restrictions. And you felt the same thing that every other immigrant, no matter the color.
Right.
So it's very interesting to have this slant on, the whole cultural aspect. It's and I guess your perceptions was that it was American. You're married to American. So it's all okay. My children are American. It's
Right.
all okay.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice touch to the interviews that I will be doing. I was just
Yeah.
wondering, because I'm interviewing a French Canadian, right? And I was wondering, I know about I've heard from Jojo some of the history of French Canada, and it wasn't easy either, where people think it was okay. Can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, I mean, being from the West Coast, it's more separate for me. My mom lives in Ontario, which is right beside Quebec. So there's a lot more politics that way with Quebec and French Canada, and a lot more. I mean, I did live in Ontario for a year when I was in high school, and I worked at I worked at a deli. This was a long time ago, but I remember people being angry when I was in high school that I couldn't speak French to them, and the French would come in and would be angry. Why aren't you speaking French? And I'm like, we're in Ontario. Why I don't need to speak French. This is me in high school, right?
Yes.
Like
Well, yes.
French. But there's always BC, you don't get it a lot. Of course there's French Canadians everywhere, but there's this very feeling of, I'm just saying from an outside perspective, is a lot of people don't like the French, don't like the Quebecois,
Yeah.
they, you know, it's kind of, they make fun of them or this or that. It's kind of this, yeah, there's quite a separate.
Snootiness, would you say snootiness?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's a real separation of now, and I'm not saying everyone's like this, but there's lots of jokes about it,
Yeah.
about the feeling of Quebec, or yeah, people from Quebec, and they're like, oh yeah, we know you're from Quebec or whatever. And or the Quebecer, like, we want to be separate. We've always wanted to be separate. And the rest,
City. Yeah.
and then the rest of Canada is like, go ahead, be separate, good luck. Kind of the joke, right?
Yeah.
So
I went to school at McGill,
yeah,
well, Whitby first, and
yeah,
then at McGill, I
yeah.
was in a special program for persons with disabilities and extra abilities kind of
Uh,
thing.
uh-huh.
It was a study, but it did resound with me that kind of, you know, elitists,
Yeah,
you're better, you're not good enough if you're not speaking French. And I
right.
kind of shut down my language totally for me. So
Yeah,
I understand.
yeah, yeah. And that's like in British Columbia, you didn't feel it as much, but I did, and my mom lives in Ontario, in Ottawa, and of course that's so political now anyways. But she talks about it all the time. She's like,
Yeah.
and best friend is French, and
Yes.
but it's like that very, yeah, it's kind of the elitist. It's kind of the same in France too, though. And I mean, the
Yes.
French, Parisians, people from Paris think they're better than everyone.
Uh,
And I know French from France, they do not like Quebec French at all. They think it's like
in the
horrible.
Caribbean, we have something quite similar between Martinique and Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe,
Oh,
lots more laid back, but the Parisian type life, very uh
right.
bougie, and yes.
Yeah.
So it's we too, it had, the French have brought it to the Caribbean as well. So it's all right.
Yeah.
We're familiar.
The only thing I can kind of relate it to is I would say people, because I've lived in the South too of America, and like you get Louisiana
Yeah.
people and something like that. Let's say Louisiana, and then the northern people are like, "Pfft, you're from the you're from Louisiana," like kind of that same sort of like
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. That's a very nice slant as well, because one of the other things that people perceive is one Canada. It's not
Yeah.
really one Canada.
No.
And BC, as I remember it, was sort of, my friend says it's the hippy dippy area, but
Right.
you're more into the arts and
Yeah.
into the you know sustainable living, and that kind of thing.
The one thing what I really notice about the West and not living there is, yes, it's the natural living, the very, very into the environment, which I love. I love all that stuff. And naturally, I'm like that way. But I notice now living, because I've lived in southern US too, is West Coast in general, Canada, BC, all the way down through California, they're so body focused. I'm just saying the general population, it's everything's fitness, food. You have to be eating the right, type of food. And they're snobby that way. Like
Yes.
you can go to a fried food place or any, that's unhealthy, and that's not right either, like you get to that point where sure, healthy living is great, um, and very
Don't
outdoor.
obsess.
Yeah, but a lot of them are quite obsessed because when I go back there, I'm like, wow, it's like just fitness insanity.
A bit much of me. Um, it wasn't until that it's in growing up in Europe, fitness happens because you walk everywhere, you bike everywhere. It
Right.
wasn't it wasn't thrust at you.
Right.
So now I have to do my PE credits, and I have to lift
Yeah.
weights and power walk. And it
Yeah.
feels so unnatural. Although in running my farm back home,
Yeah.
I was picking up 50-pound sacks. So
Yeah.
it just feels
Yeah.
sort of
Right.
not natural.
Right. I know. It's a weird thing. I mean, naturally, I am really outdoorsy, and I love all, like I skied my whole life. So skiing and hiking and all that sort of stuff is fun. But when you start talking about it, like, oh, this has this many calories and you burnt that, I'm like, I don't care. Don't talk to me about it.
Yes.
Like, care. I'm not doing it for that reason. So
No, no, totally love it. Totally love it. Um, so what are some of the misconceptions America has about Canada?
Um, oh, there's quite a few, but misconception, okay, the ones that I'm just like, I can't even get past is, oh, that's Toronto, Canada. I'm like, there's a whole country like above you. It goes from West Coast to East Coast. Like there's both oceans. Like just they have a lot of them is just like the misconception that um I this is just I guess this is in general, the states is like they don't know about any other country except the United States.
Yes.
And they like the whole world revolves around the US. It's like, oh my gosh, like there's a whole culture. But Canadian, what is their misconception? Oh, it's all cold, freezing cold all the time.
Because you're up north.
Because you're up north, so it's snowing and cold. I mean, no, I mean the West Coast, you go inland West Coast, there's like hot, dry, 100 degrees in the summer, um, uh, grapevines, wineries, all that stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
it's hot, hot, beautiful lakes, swimming, you know, swim all.
BC can be very hot in the summer.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yeah, really. Yeah. So the misconception that it's cold all the time. Um, what else? What are some of the things? Yeah, like that there's only the east side of Canada. Oh, you all speak French. No. Oh, no, no, that's not true. Yeah, we learn French in school, but just like you guys learn Spanish in school, it's school French. It's not like,
Yes.
any so, yeah, what else? Oh, hmm, yeah, I can't think of anything right now. I'm sure I can think of a pile of things, but I just, um,
Blanking out right now.
yeah, yeah,
No,
just
that's okay. That's what, again, another common denominator. Everything in the Caribbean is Jamaican for, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
right? For the US. So totally get that a lot. Uh every, they don't know every place is Africa, although Africa is many countries,
right,
you
right.
know. Um,
Yeah,
every Latin America is Mexican,
right.
you know. So their understanding of geography is different. But can you tell me a little bit about the mixing of people in Canada? You know,
Well,
um,
oh, I
other
missed
than
that.
the French,
What's that?
other than the French, the
I
mixing of.
first part what you said.
Can you tell me about the mixing of people? Because Canada has been a place, a safe home for a lot
Right.
of different people seeking asylum.
Yeah. So, okay, so for the West Coast, it's been interesting where I was born is kind of inland British Columbia. Um very involved. The one thing I don't like is, like my grandfather was involved in the war. I mean, so many people serve
Mm-hmm.
um their country, and it's like, oh, Canada's not in any of the wars, or Canada, and it's like there's so many
Oh,
people
it's
that
interesting.
die for their country, and it's not just US. I'm
Yeah.
talking just the wars that have been, which are not nice and stuff, but um and then yes, people that the one thing I noticed, because when I did live in Ontario, a lot of people that came to immigrate to Canada knew Canada is Ottawa was the capital. So a lot of people that I was friends with were from like Brazil, and they they thought that was the only place to go. And I guess maybe because it's the capital, it's easier, but it's so cold and horrible. So they were all my friends were so cold. They're like, why? They think this is where we've immigrated to the North Pole, because Ontario is freezing. So a lot of people immigrate there, and I think it is maybe because they can get through the system there. But the West Coast, we have so many Asian.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the Chinese are it's all Chinese in Vancouver, especially. Vancouver is all Chinese. Interior BC, where I was my younger years, um, they really own every Ukrainian, lots of Ukrainian people. Um, it's a big farming business up there. So the Chinese, Mexican they love the farming up in British Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Interior
Yeah.
British, really good. Have raised all their families up there. It's not just now. I mean, that's why there's a big population of um yeah,
How do you all deal with the differences of culture? Because I remember Canadian friends saying, we don't mind welcoming people, but like one Chinese person jumped at them in the line and thought they had a right, that to push
yeah,
their way in. How does Canada
yeah,
do that? I've seen Trudeau's very inclusive looking parliament, but how do
Yeah.
you manage the various cultures?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting because definitely the Chinese culture, they're very close and they don't mind the pushing, shoving, getting on buses and moving people out of the way and and
Yeah.
Canadian like, "Hey, I need my space. Don't come near my," Um, so and then also where I was in Vancouver, there was a lot of Iranians, lot of big culture of Iranian and a lot of Middle Eastern people. But yeah, it's funny that, I mean, not speaking because I haven't been around for so long and Trudeau, you know, um, I wasn't he wasn't around when I was there, but the inclusiveness, I mean, our the way I was raised, it's just I don't know, everyone's the same. So I always was, I mean, like we had family that my camera's going the wrong way, sorry. We did the like Ukrainian dancing and we were very involved in that type of culture. And of course, we love all the restaurants, like all so the the Asian the Asian culture was probably the biggest for me on the West Coast. And it was always like, well, they're always, the smartest. So I'm not even going to apply to UBC. Well, I mean, that's like all my friends that were
Yeah.
like, be nice.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess I never really, I guess just family wise, personality wise, like and all my friends out east were from Brazil. And, we're kind of those families that we love multiculturals. So I guess I never really thought about it. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, you know,
I'll
yeah,
tell you why I asked, because when I was in Denmark in the 80s, 90s maybe, when the Iran war was going on, Shah of Iran was happening and people were
yes,
fleeing, they came to Denmark. But
yeah,
the Danish are very friendly, loud, and embrace everybody and stuff like that. And they figured, while you're here in my country, you'll be, okay, and we'll embrace you. And if they saw a pretty girl, they would stare, you know,
yeah,
and it caused for a lot of cultural clashes.
yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
And so it's sometimes coming with your culture to
yeah,
another country to start your own life. It
right,
starts some cultural wars, if you know what I mean.
right.
Um, so and I've just found my friend's comment on the Chinese who were pushing their way in line because you're not accustomed to
Yeah,
that, you know.
right,
But I think it's a Canada, if I may say for you, is a live and let live place,
right. Yeah, I agree with that.
you know.
Yeah, definitely, there's cultural things that you would maybe, make fun of, like just jokingly, I'm saying when we were younger, like, oh, that's funny, but nothing that would be like a real cultural, like, hey, there's kind of inner turmoil between, you know, two different cultures. Yeah. And I think that's what it was. Like, I guess we had Chinese friends. We had, we would go over to their house and it wasn't anything. Um, yeah. And especially BC. I don't know.
Yeah, BC is that place. And
Yeah.
on to BC, I just remember the Chinese in white and was told
Yeah.
that's not a good sign.
Yeah. I feel like I knew there was Chinese gangs
Yeah.
in Vancouver. So, and I heard about that, but I was pretty young, so it wasn't like, but you knew that you don't mess with the
Uh,
Chinese
yeah.
when it is that type, but I was so young, I didn't, it's not like I'm,
No.
you know, part of
Mm.
that world, so
And that's just me touring as a teen, going clubbing and different things and just people telling you the ropes, don't do this.
yes. Yeah,
So
and yeah, yeah. It was more that um it was just they owned everything. The Chinese owned everything. So it was like, wow, just so much money.
mm,
Um, but so that maybe kind of made it, because for them it was so cheap, even the skiing and buying places up on the ski hill. So I think like my parents, it was like, oh, well, we can't afford anything, because the Chinese own everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, I
That
don't know.
started to happen in England as well, where people felt disenfranchised because,
Yeah.
here were the Arabs and
Yeah, right.
just buying up everything and
Yeah.
just pushing back the wealth. And then West Indians, when they came in the 60s, taking jobs from the
Right.
poorer class, because the poorer class weren't as educated as some of the West Indians. So we have all of these pushbacks of inequity that sometimes happens in these scapes. You know, it
And I
balances out eventually.
this is interesting. This is kind of both sides, but I found, and just hearing some things that are going on right now in Canada, but um the I don't want to call them the wrong, now they're not called that. What are they called now? See, I haven't even been up there in so long. Um Not Native Americans. They are called
First people, darling.
First Nation.
First
First
Nation, yeah.
First Nation. That's what they like to be called. I just had to think about that for a second. It's First Nation. Um I think there's more trouble with that, the First Nations, and what's going on with in British Columbia. I mean, all over Canada.
Yeah.
But um, it's still, there's some problems both ways. I mean, yeah, they've been pushed off their land. We know that, right? That's gone on everywhere. But also too, um, they're killing their own people. First Nation people have been killing their own people for so long, and there's so much drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
Yes, the white man created it. They did, because they put them on reservations and um, allowed them to have these stores with just full rain alcohol and all that. So there's been so many like, it's just bad, 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 bad all around. But then in the same breath, then there's problems with First Nation people just being violent, like violent and robbing and killing people, so I think that inner turmoil too is,
Yes.
I'm no, there's a lot going on right now with that.
We have the
Um,
same thing in colonial countries where um there's this, like Jamaica, where there's this generational revenge, so to
yeah,
speak, you know.
right.
So you never can go forward. And people, I have friends who feel guilty about their past, but it
Yeah,
wasn't their past. And
right.
that's for me speaking,
Yeah,
like I keep telling West Indians, it says, if you are angry about being sold into slavery, maybe the first thing you should do is see my grandfather. He's Bedouin. He raided his family raided villages and
yeah,
sold them to the Portuguese because they wouldn't know where to go get him, you know? So,
yeah,
and first people are arrivals as well. They're the first nation, it's true. But
right,
that's 60,000 years ago when they crossed the Siberian Peninsula and
right,
then kept populating right down into South America. I don't
right,
think there's a people who haven't come from somewhere to settle anywhere.
right,
But I think we all trying to figure out how we do this and still love our brother and accept everything. We have
right.
4 minutes.
Yep.
Give me some parting words that you would like to see with culture and understanding, besides Americans learning geography. But um, uh,
Which I could give a geography class, because I'm drives me crazy.
it
But
does, for all of us, dear, for all of us. Um, but mind you, maybe that pushes me against the ropes where I don't know which state's which, but I haven't traveled through here too much either. Growing up in Europe, you weren't too fancying to come in the first place. It
yeah,
wasn't popular thought.
Canadians are known to travel a lot. We travel a lot all over the world.
Yes, that is quite true. I look for
Yeah.
that. that maple leaf on everybody's bag. No, okay, safe, not American.
Yeah, makes a difference.
It does make a huge difference. So
Yeah,
yes, tell me some parting things. We have 3 minutes.
just about like culturally, like what we need to be working on. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, look at, one nation under God. I
Yes.
mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is to really see the world as that too. We're one nation under God. Um, and that's, I guess, what all I would say is just love our brother. What did Jesus do? What did Jesus do? I mean, he did not see the Samaritan, he helped his brother. That's all we need to work on. And I try to do that every day, and it's not about color.
Yeah, the color is the variety of life that makes it so
Yeah,
interesting. Otherwise, we'd all know each other already and it'd be very dull.
right. All the same flowers. I don't think so. That
Oh,
wouldn't that wouldn't be any fun.
thank you. This has been really enjoyable. And I'm looking forward to my French Canadian. I'm looking either at doing Jojo, which will be very entertaining,
Yeah.
or doing Carol. So whichever is available to me. So we will
Okay.
see. I will show you the things when we're done.
Yeah, please do. That was great. Thanks for thinking of me too.
Thank you. I loved you when I met you, and so I couldn't help but think of you.
Well, I love you too.
Bye. Thank
Okay,
you. Bye.
good. Bye.
Bye.